Welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Danny Cannell, that's Bud Elliott, that's Tom Fernelli. I'm Chip Patterson coming to you live on CBS Sports Network. Fired up to get you set for the week ahead in the Big Ten. Lots to get to, including our big game breakdown, the keys to the game, the X factors for a massive game for the undefeated wagon that is the Indiana Hoosiers as they welcome Michigan in the big time game on CBS. But first, we're going to go more towards the middle of the Big Ten standings. No, not necessarily locked in on those teams right at the top like Indiana. What about those teams that are going to have a little bit of perspiration coming down the stretch? Boys, we're going to play a little game of bowl or no bowl. Teams that are kind of on the cut line for trying to reach bowl eligibility. We will start with the Wisconsin Badgers. Now, Wisconsin is 5-4. Their remaining schedule, they're off this week. They have Oregon at home, at Nebraska, the Minnesota at home. Danny Cannell, bowl or no bowl for Wisconsin?
I have Wisconsin. By the way, I also did grades for all these teams because I screwed up the assignment. So if you want a grade for all of them, I'll let you know. But I say, yes, they go bowling. But I'm a little bit nervous about it because I'm worried about what version of Wisconsin am I going to get? Am I going to get the one that goes out there and blows out Purdue or Rutgers and Notre Dame? Or am I going to get the one that gets blown out against Iowa? But I don't think any of their remaining opponents outside of Oregon, of course. So they have to get one at Nebraska, who is really limping themselves, or home at Minnesota. I say they get one of those and potentially both. I'll say Wisconsin does go bowling. I think they've been getting better and better. The Iowa one I'll look at as an aberration and say, with Iowa's new look offense, which looks like the Kansas City Chiefs all of a sudden, I'm going to say maybe that one just got a little bit sideways. I think they can get a win against Nebraska or Minnesota, so I'll say yes, they go bowling.
I'm with Danny. They're not going to run into anybody who's as good as Brendan Sullivan down the stretch, of course. Well, except for maybe Max Brosmer and Dylan Gabriel. But no, I think those 3 wins they ripped off had a lot to do with who the teams were. They were playing with Purdue and Rutgers and Northwestern, and specifically who was missing for those teams, especially in that Rutgers game. But I do think the odds favor Wisconsin going to a bowl, picking off one of Nebraska or Minnesota, probably not Oregon. So I'm going to go bowl.
I'm also going bowl, but it's not with the highest level of confidence. I give them maybe like 0.3% chance of beating Oregon in that game, and then it's going to come down to, can they go on the road and beat Nebraska, which maybe they can. Nebraska did just lose at home to UCLA, so it's not exactly like it's a fortress there right now for the Cornhuskers. But I do think it's going to come down to that last game of the season, the Friday after Thanksgiving at home against Minnesota in a rivalry game. I feel like that's going to be a game where Wisconsin needs the win to get to that 6th win. So I'm going to give it to them, but like I said, not overly confident at this point.
No bowl. I don't think that Wisconsin's in a good place right now. And here's the problem about that game at Nebraska, a team we'll talk about in just a little bit. They got to get that game too. That's one of the games on Nebraska's remaining schedule where they're like, oh my goodness, like, we need to have the urgency of being able to get there. I don't love that place, but I think Minnesota is just playing so much better than Wisconsin right now. Unless the Badgers are able to really turn things around, I think that they're going to end up taking a couple losses. You know, the Oregon game could be one of those that's just a little bit deflating and tough to get up off the mat for. I'm putting W's and L's all over the place with my Big Ten predictions the rest of the way, and I'm just struggling to move Wisconsin onto the right side. I'm going to go no bowl for the Wisconsin Badgers. All right, what about the Michigan Wolverines? They are going to be on CBS at Indiana this week. After that, they've got an off week, then their home finale against Northwestern, and then at Ohio State. They are 5-4. All right, Tom, I'll let you get first crack at this one. Michigan, bowl or no bowl?
They better get to a bowl. Like, I don't know if they're going to beat Indiana this week, and I don't know that they're going to beat Ohio State. But if this Michigan team can't beat Northwestern, there are bigger problems than we realize. I do think that they get that win. They might be 6-6. It won't be pretty. Nobody will be happy about it. It's not going to be a bowl game that Wolverines fans want to travel to. But I do think they'll get to a bowl, yes.
Yeah, I have a hard time seeing Northwestern score enough on Michigan to truly win that game. So I'm going to go ahead and go with bowl. But man, it's crazy to me that we're playing bowl or no bowl with Michigan in November, right? Like needing to beat Northwestern, and that's even a question on today's show, but it is. And I think that says a lot about how far this program has fallen with the coaching change from Harbaugh to Sherrone Moore. But I am going to go Bowl. I don't think Northwestern's going to win in the Big House.
Ditto. I think it's 6-6 is the final tally, which is well below their win total to start the season. They'll probably start playing some young guys. I do worry some about guys opting out or getting injured or whatever you want to read in between that assumption at the end of the season. But I would assume even with some backups and younger guys playing, they would be able to beat Northwestern. So I think 6-6 is the final tally, which would get them to a bowl. Although, like you guys said, I don't know how well they travel to that one.
Have we talked about this yet? First of all, my answer is bowl, but like, if there's a Michigan, Ohio State, wouldn't it be hilarious? Like, there's a universe, right? It's like a small percentage universe, a very small percentage universe, but there's a wouldn't it be hilarious there? But no. I think they've got it taken care of. I think they do it against Northwestern. I also have Michigan as a bowl team. The Washington Huskies, it's been a little bit up and down in year one as a Big Ten member. They are currently 5-4 overall. They are at Penn State this weekend. Then after that, they play UCLA at home. Then they are off. Then they are at Oregon. You got Penn State. You got Oregon. You still need one more game there. Bud, Washington, bowl or no bowl?
I got to stick with my bold prediction from the preseason, which was that Washington was going to miss a bowl. So I'm going no bowl. I think Penn State gets them. I think Oregon gets them, and I think UCLA finds the way to pull the upset. That's a hard sandwich game to play, by the way. I mean, you got to go to Penn State and then Oregon, and by the way, UCLA, which, like, they're not good, but they haven't quit on the season. Like, they're still playing hard. I think UCLA clips them. I think Washington misses a bowl.
Woo! But you can always go to the ace in the hole, which is if you guys beat UCLA, we'll give you off a couple more days on the bye week, which follows that one. And I think Jedd Fisch plays that card. I think they get their best performance against UCLA, who is a hot team. I don't know if it's going to be a resounding win, but I'll say they squeak by and go 6-6. Again, I don't see them beating Penn State or Oregon on the road, even going well-rested to Oregon and potentially with Oregon, their eyes on the Big Ten championship game. I do think they get UCLA, though, and get the win there.
Danny's playing chess with these days off theory here. I think they get to a bowl. Like, I think they have I don't think they're going to beat Penn State, but I don't think it's insane to think that they can beat Penn State. And I think that game against UCLA, it is kind of strange because if you look at the Bruins, they have not been good, but all three of their wins have come on the road. So the fact that this game's in Seattle might not be to Washington's benefit. I still think the Huskies get it, though. They're going bowling.
I actually think it is to the Huskies' benefit. Great point on the UCLA side of this, but I was thinking about how Jedd Fisch and this team have been pretty good in Husky Stadium. That Michigan game was so big, and they were able to come out with the win. USC, another crucial game for Washington during this season. That game in Husky Stadium, they were able to get a win. I think that this has been a pretty good home team. I think they're able to maintain that. Mark me down as bowl for the Washington Huskies. Okay. Nebraska Cornhuskers. I said other teams are going to be desperate too. Nebraska is 5-4. They are off this week. They will be back in action at USC on November the 16th. Then they have Wisconsin in their home finale at Iowa. I mean, USC, Wisconsin, Iowa's. I mean, those are three pretty tough games, but you just need one of them. Danny, does Matt Rule get Nebraska after a long layoff finally back into the postseason?
I was bullish on this team coming into the season. I thought they could be undefeated at the point going to Ohio State, which they did put up a pretty good fight in that game. But I've also been giving out bowl games like Oprah gives out cars. I'm going to say Nebraska loses out. Matt Rule was at the podium, asked about the problems with the offense, and he let out a sigh that I don't even know if you could describe. Like, it was a sigh of desperation, so much so they're bringing back former coaches and weren't even there, and Dana Holgorsen to try to get those extra ears and extra insight, and hasn't even been announced exactly what his role is going to be. Now you got Dylan Raiola with a back. Like, I wonder how long that could potentially crop up. I'm going to say they miss a bowl, lose out the season for a devastating finish to year 2 for Matt Rule.
You know, Danny, I think that sigh was kind of a knowing sigh of, man, I'm going to have to make a move on my boy Satterfield, the offensive coordinator, who we've said for years on Cover 3 was a really bad hire. terrible track record. And, if they weren't tight, like, would he really have hired him? I'd be pretty shocked given the track record, but he did. And it's definitely been a terrible hire that's cost Nebraska some games. This was the toughest decision for me. And I'm going to go ahead and go no bowl. There's too many variables here, especially with the Raiola injury. But I kind of think that's what that sigh was, dude. He's going to have to make some changes.
You guys have way too much faith in USC and Wisconsin. I mean, they're going to go to USC after the bye week. That place is going to be a mausoleum. People weren't showing up to the stadium the last few weeks when USC still had something to play for. Now that they're 4-5, nobody's going to be showing up there. They're going to win one of their final 3 games. I don't think it's going to be pretty. I don't think it's going to be a blowout, but they're going to get one. They'll end up in a bowl game.
Yeah, I am also on the bowl side of this, and this is, me trying to have some integrity here. If I'm going to go Wisconsin, no bowl, part of that is thinking that I would pick Nebraska in that game. That would get them to 6 wins. All right, what about the Michigan State Spartans? Off this week, their remaining schedule is at USC, Wisconsin, at Iowa. Tom, can Michigan State get 2 of those 3 and be bowl eligible?
It's not going to be easy. I don't know. Like, Illinois is not playing well right now, so I think going on the road there in 2 weeks and beating the Illini is not impossible for the Spartans, but they have to look a lot more like the team that was playing Iowa than they have in the Michigan or Indiana games. Purdue, they should win at home. It could very much come down to that Rutgers game, and Rutgers right now, not to play spoiler alert for our next pick, is not playing very good football. So I'm going to say Michigan State gets there, but by the skin of their teeth. It won't be easy at all.
I'm going to say no bowl. I think their turnover problems are pretty significant. It's still a very young team. The depth is not really probably where it needs to be. And they're going to need Childs to play like perfect games. And his style of play means they can pull upsets, but also it means like even the Purdue game to me is losable. So I'm going to say no bowl for the Spartans. That team keeps improving and growing.
Rutgers has lost 4 games in a row. I think that's the game that makes the difference for Michigan State. All they got to do is win 2 out of 3. I think Purdue is the gimme one that I'm going to give them that one. I don't even know if I'm that convinced that they definitely lose at Illinois, but I think they get 2 or 3 at home. So I'll say they're bowling.
Yeah, I'm going to say Michigan State is bowl. Classic, year one theory for me that those first-year coaches, sometimes at the end of the season, you start to see them really starting to put it together. And I like being able to get those 2 opponents both in your house to close out the season. I say Michigan State is bowling. All right, Danny, what about those Rutgers Scarlet Knights? 4-4. A lot of meat left on the bone for them. They are Minnesota at Maryland, Illinois at Michigan State. Greg Schiano talking about getting 1 win better every single year, having conversations with us at a Big Ten Media Days. They're not going to be 1 win better unless they win them all, I guess. But what are they even bowling?
So they're a touchdown underdog to Minnesota, and Minnesota's been playing really good football. I think they lose that one. I just was talking about Michigan State. I gave Michigan that win. So that means they've got to win both on the road at Maryland, at home against Illinois. I'm going to say they do not. I'm going to say they finish the season with 5 wins, coming well short of the 6 needed. I'm going to say they miss a bowl game.
I think they're healthier now. And to me, that is the large reason for the slide. I mean, they played Nebraska close. They were totally banged up against Wisconsin. UCLA was a total dogfight. USC, not really competitive. But again, the bye week came, I believe, at the right time for Rutgers. I think they can get 2 more wins. I'm going to say Rutgers goes bowling.
I need to see what Kyle Monangai looks like after the bye, because he did get hurt late in that USC game and did not play late in the game. So I don't know what kind of health he's in, if he's going to be ready, how healthy he's going to be for these final 4 games. The bye does help, but I do think the schedule hurts in that the 2 most beatable opponents left on Rutgers' schedule are both road games, which kind of ups the difficulty a little bit. So as for now, I'm going to go they're finishing 5-7 and missing a bowl.
All right, last one here. Maryland 4-4 right now. Remaining schedule includes at Oregon this week, Rutgers at home, Iowa at home, and then at Penn State. Bud, I see an Oregon. I see a Penn State. I see an Iowa. Yikes. Does Mike Loxley get this team to the postseason?
No. I'm going to refer back to my preseason notes, which literally say Bet Maryland against teams that don't have good D lines. Fade them against teams that do. And I see Oregon, I see Iowa, I see Penn State, and I see Rutgers defense that, like I said, hopefully they're a little healthier. They can still get after it. I think they lose out and miss a bowl. So no, I think Maryland's going to go 4-8, and they should have got it done earlier. Losing Michigan State and losing Northwestern, that's kind of fatal.
Yeah, that Northwestern loss really kind of put the nail in the coffin of Maryland's bowl hopes. If they do win a game, it'll be the Rutgers game, but even that I'm not super confident in. But like Bud, I have very low confidence in their ability to beat either Penn State, Oregon, or Iowa. So no bowl for the Terps.
You know what's interesting is I'm on the same page as all of you guys saying they miss, but all of us chalking up a lot of wins for the Iowa Hawkeyes. What looks like it could be a 9-3 season for Iowa. I know this wasn't the exercise, but I think I'm going to say Maryland misses the bowl as well. I'll say they do get the home game against Rutgers. They win that one 5-7 to finish, but miss out on the bowl.
Yeah, I've got no bowl as well for the Terps. So big games ahead. We'll see. Maybe come back and grade some of these at season's end. Well, coming up on the other side, as we do every single week here on CBS Sports Network, we take you inside the matchup for the big-time CBS Game of the Week. This week, Michigan at Indiana. We'll get into all that and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. Well, every single Tuesday, we like to take you inside the matchup of one of the biggest games ahead in the Big Ten. And it doesn't get much bigger than Indiana's chance on the big stage. That's right, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time on CBS, America's Most Watched Network, the network of stars, that we are going to see Curt Cignetti's group still undefeated, deep into the season, going up against the reigning champions. Now, look, it tells you exactly how Indiana and Michigan's season has gone, that the odds makers have made the Hoosiers a 2-touchdown favorites against the Wolverines. But as we go inside this matchup, Tom, where are some of those advantages? What is it that Indiana is doing well that Michigan is not? Where do you think the game could end up being decided?
How much time do we have in the segment? I mean, what's Indiana doing well that Michigan's not? Pretty much everything. Like, I think if you look at the Hoosiers' offense in particular, they can throw the ball and run the ball. They're not just forced to do one. Even when they lose their starting quarterback, who they've stuck with all year, to an injury, their backup is able to come in and they're still able to run a competent offense, even if they're running the ball a lot more regularly than they would have been with Curtis Rourke. But just to genuinely answer your question, I think Indiana just has more talent at the skill positions, which is a ridiculous thing to think about when you consider how Indiana has recruited over the years compared to how Michigan is supposed to be recruiting. But the one thing that Curt Cignetti did that has really worked in Indiana's favor since he took the job from James Madison, he brought a lot of good players with him from James Madison. He went in the transfer portal and got a lot of good players from smaller schools. Instead of looking at just, talent and athletic ratings, he was getting productive players thinking, all right, they can be productive. They're veterans. They've been in this before. They're not new to it. We can get them in and we can put together a good team. Did he really think he was going to have this good of a team? He'll say he did. I don't know if I believe that so much, but the Hoosiers are just a very good team. They're good on offense. They can put up points. Defensively, they've been very sound. They do not have superstars. They do not have a bunch of NFL players, kind of like what you're going to see on the side of the ball for Michigan. But they play smart, they play well, they're disciplined, they don't get out of their gaps, they don't make many mistakes, and they put pressure on you and force you into making those mistakes. So just overall, this is a very good, very well-coached football team, which is something that I'm not sure we can say about Michigan at this point.
Totally agree with Tom. I don't think that Curt Cignetti could have known just how good this team was going to be when he put it together. He may have had an inkling in spring when he saw, we have the Curtis Rourke that Ohio had 2 years ago when healthy, except somehow he's continued, to progress. He's playing like as well as his brother used to play. And now, that means we have an upper quartile quarterback in the Big Ten at least, and probably even better than that. There was probably some, maybe question in his mind, what happens when the lights actually come on, right? Given his injury history, how's he going to be when he's actually taking hits? But he had to know during practice, we got something here. Like we constructed a team we thought could make a bowl. Maybe a bowl +1. But if you're going to give me one of the best damn quarterbacks in the conference on top of a really experienced, almost like G5 All-Star team, if you will, I think then he probably knew. Tom nailed it. I think the D-line, though, for Indiana has been a real, just absolute boon for them. They wrecked Michigan State last weekend. That was the key to make sure that game didn't get away from them.
Yeah, you know why I think he knew he had a good team? Because he coached a lot of them back at James Madison. I've said that a few times. I mean, bringing in 14 players with you from James Madison and bringing your, coordinators, bringing Bryant Haynes, who was a finalist for the Broyles Award in 2023 to run the defense. I think he had an inkling that he probably had guys with great attitude, with, adequate skill set of athletic talent. And the big question was, well, how do we stack up against bigger, stronger, faster? And I think where the edge comes in is clearly they've shown they can stack up with majority of Big Ten teams. Now, does that test come against Ohio State? We'll see. And potentially against Michigan, we'll see. Because this is probably the best defensive that they've faced. But in this transfer portal era where teams are still trying to figure out the balance of recruiting versus new guys versus, do we go, what level do we get players from? The one thing that we can all value is continuity. And this team, they know exactly what is being asked from them. And the defense specifically is the thing I wanted to highlight. Bud brought it up. Mikal Kamara leads the Big Ten with sacks, 9.5 sacks. He's a James Madison transfer. James Carpenter, their nose tackle, James Madison transfer. Jalen Walker and Aiden Fisher, two linebackers, both transfers from James Madison. And then D'Angelo Pons, their corner, a James Madison transfer. You know what I realized they taught really, really well at James Madison? Tackling. They're just a really good, fundamentally sound team, which shouldn't surprise us considering Cignetti's background all the way to his days learning under Nick Saban. So I think this is just a really good football team that has the right mindset, that came in hungry to prove people wrong. And now you throw in that confidence they're playing with. They're just a really good football team right now.
0 net yards allowed in the fourth quarter by that Indiana defense in that game against Michigan State. And it started out, it was like 128, 50, 25, 0. They are well coached. They are relentless. They put themselves in the right position. And to your point, Danny, they go out there and they do everything fundamentally sound. It is a joy to watch in this era where it does seem like, greatness can only be achieved by the super splashy names that everybody knows coming into the season in July, when Indiana has names that we have to learn. Like guys that weren't on our radar that we're able to just say, look at the way that they are playing. Let's make sure to give them flowers. Let's make sure to put them in the spotlight. So great job of evaluation. Great job of roster construction. Curt Cignetti ruining the year one expectations for coaches all across the country because no one's going to be able to replicate this. But what about the other side? Because technically, even though Sharon Moore has wins as a acting head coach, this is also year one of the Sharon Moore era. And there have been, in obviously some of the wins, moments where you can see it all put together. There have been even in some of the losses where the Wolverines within games have gotten close only to fall just short. So Danny, it's very clear that Michigan is not anywhere close to the expectation. It's very clear that this is a Michigan team that has to start thinking about what next year is going to look like. But as they look to finish this thing out, what do you think is the identity of the Michigan Wolverines right now?
Well, I think they found it when Jack Tuttle decided to retire and they realized Davis Warren was going to have to be their guy, because I think everyone kind of knows it's not Alex Orji, but yet they do realize they have a pretty good weapon running the football. So I think we saw what they're going to be the last month of the season, which is they're going to try to be physical, something we've always seen from them the last 2 years. Davis Warren is the quarterback, but you'll still get a sprinkling of Alex Orji in there to run some wildcat, to run a little bit of gadgety plays. And then you're still going to try to lead with Donovan Edwards and Kalel Mullings. The defense, to me, is the thing that I wonder about as the injuries start to mount up. Both corners, Will Johnson, missed last week. Is that something that starts to potentially be an issue for this Michigan defense, which, kept them in a lot of games? That, to me, is what I wonder. And then where's the mindset of this team? They've fallen so far short of expectations. We've talked about, putting teams on quit watch. Where is their mental psyche? Is this, and clearly I think you'll get it against Ohio State, a rivalry game, But, if Indiana can knock this out of them, what type of fight do they put forward? And they'd still put forth good effort against Oregon. Like, that game was not an easy one for Oregon, but I don't think they're good enough to compete with Indiana or Ohio State in the back end of their season.
One of the areas that Michigan really had to stay healthy this year was in the secondary. Okay. They lost one of their best players to Alabama in the transfer portal in the offseason. They lost a number of guys to the draft. They also lost one of their top safeties back in spring to an ACL. And they've also lost 2 more guys. And at least in my preseason notes, it's like, this is a spot where the drop off from starter to backup is huge. And I think you're seeing that now. And you could say, hey, the new DC didn't do a very good job early on this season. I think that's probably fair. Martindale, to me, has been a pretty big drop off from what they had last year. But now you're dealing with probably lesser coaching and also a lot lesser quality of player in the back end. And so I think people are able to get Michigan with some of the quick game stuff. The defensive line is not getting as much of a chance to get home, and that's sort of diminished one of the bigger advantages that Michigan has had. If they're going to win this game, they really got to have the offense step it up, because I don't think they're going to hold Indiana to like 14 or 17.
You mentioned the injuries in the secondary, and they have had a huge impact, and they've also impacted the way that Michigan has been able to play on defense. Like early in the year with Wink Martindale, they were very much a blitz-heavy team. They haven't blitzed nearly as much because they don't trust their corners and their safeties to hold up in that kind of man coverage as much as they did early in the year. It turns out losing Will Johnson kind of impacts the way you could cover teams. But if you look beneath the hood, while that's been the case, like the last 3 weeks when they've been without Will Johnson for the most part, their pressure rate has actually gone up without the same number type of blitzes that they had. Their blitz to pressure ratio is actually improving quite a bit. And that's the one interesting aspect of this matchup to me, because as we talked about with Indiana, they don't have the talent that this Michigan team has as far as, like recruiting ratings and NFL draft profiles. But you can argue that while Indiana has not had the most difficult schedule, even if Michigan is not a team that most of the people in the country are going to look at and say that's a good football team because they're going to look at their record, this is far and away the most talented team that the Hoosiers will have faced. So it will be interesting to see, particularly in that Michigan front seven, how the Indiana offensive line operates and holds up. Because if we go back to that Nebraska game, the one in which Curtis Rourke hurt his thumb and missed the second half, Indiana had a pressure rate allowed of 35.3%. That was the highest they've had in any game so far this season. And I would argue Nebraska's defensive line was the best one that they've seen. Michigan's is better. So will Michigan be able to get that pressure, win those battles against the Indiana offensive line, and put that offense in a position that, frankly, it just hasn't been in very often because they haven't really had any kind of pressure to deal with in the pocket? Curtis Rourke has had plenty of time to stand back there, let his guys get open. The running backs have had plenty of lanes. What happens if Michigan is able to take that away? How impactful and how explosive can this Indiana offense be? Now, of course, the problem is even if Michigan's defense does slow Indiana's offense down a bit, can Michigan's offense score enough points to make up for it? I'm not overly optimistic that they can, just because we really haven't seen anything week to week to suggest that that's the case. But if there is any reason for optimism, if you're Michigan, since going back to Davis Warren, as far as an EPA perspective and expected points added per play, they've had their 3 best games on passing offense since making the switch back to Warren. It's still not good, but if you look at it overall, Colston Loveland has been more impactful, especially last week. One aspect of this Indiana defense they've had some trouble with in recent games, they've given up yards and catches to tight ends. Nebraska's Thomas Fedone had 6 for 91 against them. Washington's Kalecki Latu had 5 for 50. Maybe Michigan can find a way to get Colston Loveland much more involved in the offense like we saw last week and get some points on the board because of it. I think that's the way that they're going to have to. If they're going to score points, it's going to be because Colston Loveland has a big game.
Yeah, Michigan with Colston Loveland, with the fact that if it's not even outright trick plays, they're at least trying to be more creative to find ways to get the ball to their star tight end, to be able to get him in those matchup advantages, moving things around, trying to test a team's eye discipline. It is very clearly they are dumping everything out from the bag already, understanding the urgency of the moment. We'll see if Michigan can do it, because the lowest point total for the Indiana Hoosiers this year is 31 points. And we often say, what is the number that you need to win a ball game? Testing like a team like Michigan that's offensively challenged. 31 might be that number that might be a little bit too far for me to expect the Wolverines to reach. All very interesting stuff to keep an eye on as our attention descends on Bloomington, Indiana for the big-time Big Ten Game of the Week on CBS. You can watch it on America's Most Watched Network, the Network of Stars. You can stream it on Paramount+. Well, coming up on the other side, we figured now's a good time to check out the newcomers, right? We brought in 4 new teams to the Big Ten. How about some grades as we head into the final month of the season? Newcomer grades for Oregon, Washington, UCLA, and USC. Next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, going to give out some grades to the new teams that have joined the Big Ten. We begin with the Oregon Ducks, who are undefeated, number 1 in the country, unanimously in the AP Top 25 poll. I expect they will be number 1 in the playoff rankings. So, Danny, what grade are we giving Dan Lanning's crew?
I mean, they did give up 193 yards to Ashton Genty, and they only beat Idaho by 3 points. So I think we should make it a D, right? I mean, we have to hold that against them. No, this team has an A. I think this one was easy, right? The only question if it's an A plus is, do they go on from here to accomplish their goals and win a Big Ten championship and potentially a national championship? They've lived up to the hype. They came in with the big duck on the river in Indianapolis. They've backed it up, already got the win over Ohio State, no blemishes. It's an A all day.
Yeah, I mean, let's make this quick. It's an A. They held some stuff back for Ohio State. They broke it out. They beat Ohio State. They've almost certainly locked in their place in the Big Ten championship game as long as they can just keep taking care of business. They're beating teams like crazy in the first half and putting on cruise control in the second. Oregon gets an A. Easy.
I don't know. I'm just haven't been all that impressed by the Ducks so far this year. I'd like to see a little. No, they're an A. It's clearly they're 9-0. They're number 1 in the country. They're getting an A.
Oh yeah, they're an A. We don't need to start fires where they don't exist. The job ahead for the Ducks will determine our season-ending grade. To this point, it is absolutely an A. All right, Tom, what about those Washington Huskies?
I'm going to give them a B minus. I think that they're not exactly where they were hoping to be. I mean, we did talk earlier in the show about whether or not they would get to a bowl game, and that's up in the air. And considering this is a team that played in the title game last year, that's not a spot you would hope to be in. But with the coaching change, with all the turnover, both on the roster and on the sidelines, there were a lot of question marks about this Huskies team coming into the year. They've been able to handle their business at home. They are struggling when they go on the road. So there's a lot of things they need to work on. But considering what the expectations were, or the realistic expectations were at the beginning of the season, I think a B minus suits them right now.
B minus is a great grade, Tom. I fully agree. I think they have actually done a pretty good job coaching this football team. The personnel drop off that they had from last year to this year was really huge. Kalen DeBoer leaving as late as he did in the cycle, I think kind of hamstrung them a bit in terms of attacking the transfer portal, which they were going to have to do to reload everything that they lost. So B minus seems about right. They're still kind of on track to hit what their season win total was from the boys in Vegas.
Wasn't it 6.5 for them to coming in somewhere around there? That's why I'm at
6.5.
I'm at a C with them because, and all these grades I think are incomplete. They've got a couple games to go, but I don't think they surprise. But like they've won a few big games. Beating Michigan was huge for them. Beating USC this past weekend was huge for them. But they also, had some disappointing losses at Rutgers, and then the Iowa game is just inexplicable, like how that blowout could have happened. So I'm gonna say C, but that C is like exactly what we thought they were gonna be. So I think it's just a C. I'm right there.
Yeah, graded on a curve. I'm closer to Danny on this one. I said C+, but I think it is what could have been, knowing the Rutgers loss, the red zone failures, the special team issues, the Washington State loss. Like, we would not have been playing bowl or no bowl if you'd been doing better. So it's passing. You get credit towards graduation. Trust me, I know about that line right there. That is something that I think Washington can say is like, we're on track, but we're not really excelling. Okay, what about UCLA? Because, Bud, we talk about expectations. Expectations for UCLA were not high. And we talk about, the Bruins as a team that is still playing hard, sort of like we witnessed the investment, the way that they're going out and competing. But we are in a results-oriented business. What kind of grade do we give UCLA to this point in the season?
I'm going to give them a B. Again, head coach leaves very late in the cycle. They don't have a lot of options. I don't think they had a ton of money to go out and make the coaching hire. Again, it hamstrung them in the portal, much like Washington, except, obviously Washington was coming off a national championship appearance. So Washington a little more attractive to get guys in the portal than UCLA was. And UCLA, they do continue to fight. This team is a lot better now than it was to start the year. They struggled to put 11 guys on the field on special teams in that Hawaii game multiple times. I watched that. It was like, oh my Lord, this might be a real disaster. And yet they've come together. Like the coaching staff appears to be improving and they're growing, as you probably should do under a first-year coaching staff. They already have 2 Big Ten wins. I think they could get another. So I'm going to give them a pretty nice grade.
Going to give them a C+. They're one of the hottest teams in the conference right now. They've won 2 straight, both of them on the road against Rutgers and Nebraska. The expectations were not high. I think that they're playing pretty much according to those expectations. And I think if you look at the rest of the schedule, they might be able to get another win or 2. Maybe have not, considering where they began, might not be a terrible season to look back upon, considering how it started. So C+.
UCLA reminds me of my middle daughter. Her math grade is horrendous right now. And she tells me, she's like, but I have a couple big tests coming up. I can turn it all around. I think it's an incomplete, but I lean towards Tom. But because I gave him a C+, but I think this grade could be swayed one way or another based on the last 4 games of the season, which direction it goes. There are 2 wins on there they could get and probably should get. But if they don't get them, all of a sudden that C+ could go to a D.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Rock solid C for me. All right, Danny, let's go quickly. How bad do you want to make it? USC should not have this record right now. So where are we going with the grade for USC sitting here at 4-5?
It's an F. And I know it seems like years ago since they knocked off LSU in that opener, but the way the season has imploded on them, the way that all the adjustments on defense haven't been working, and it just hasn't transitioned to wins. Now you're benching your starting quarterback to try to find excuses. It is bad out there at Southern Cal. I think it's an F.
I'm going to give it just a D and not an F. Their 5 losses are by combined 19 points, I think. So they've been in almost every game. They still seem to be playing hard. I thought they played well against Penn State. Obviously got that season opening win against LSU, which continues to look a little bit better and better as LSU plays on. So I'm going to give them a D. Obviously, they've had some real injury problems on defense where they were already kind of thin to start the year. Not an F yet.
F. They have failed. Yeah, they've had a lot of close losses. They're USC. Close losses aren't supposed to be a consolation. You're supposed to be competing for a playoff spot. Instead, you're probably going to be 6-6.
No, it's a D. They can save it with their final exam. I think that's just like Danny's daughter. If you beat Notre Dame, it ain't an F. And they might be able to do that. So I'll say D. All right. Coming up on the other side, Danny just mentioned it. So we're going to spend a little bit more time unpacking it. Miller Moss benched for Jaden Maeva. What does it mean for the Trojans? And some more news and notes. Next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. One of the big headlines that broke overnight is that USC will be making a quarterback change. Miller Moss has been benched, and backup quarterback Jaden Maeva will take over the starting duties. He was a late addition to the roster, but he was at UNLV last year, a big part of a successful season for the Rebels. Bud, what do you think this does? What does Jaden Maeva bring to the offense?
He might bring a little more mobility than Miller Moss did. Last year, he ran for almost 300 yards. In fact, more than 300 if you take out the sacks for UNLV. Pretty accurate passer, decent arm. A lot of it was schemed up for him last year at UNLV in that go-go offense. But again, that's kind of what Lincoln Riley does for a lot of his quarterbacks as well. So a little more physically gifted, I think, than Miller Moss. And we'll see if maybe this can spark USC to make sure they make a bowl game.
I think this is a play for the future. See what you have in Jaden Maeva. Does he pop? Is it somebody you could build around for next year? This move reeks of desperation, but I agree with you on Jaden Maeva. Definitely more mobile, as Miller Moss has been getting crushed a lot this season. Helps out that offensive line. He's not going to be much more better with the football. He didn't have the best touchdown to interception ratio at UNLV, but I do think he'll help out that offensive line. They can get him on the move a little bit more.
Yeah, that turnover point is the one that really kind of raises my eyebrows a bit here, because I think that the reason Miller Moss is being benched is partially, like you said, they play for the future. But with all the problems that USC is dealing with, I don't think Moss has been the primary problem. The problem is he's been turning the ball over far too often lately, which when you're trying to overcome the other deficiencies USC is currently dealing with, it's putting them in bad spots far too often. So I get why they're making the move. It's just I don't know if Jade Maeva, due to his turnover issues at UNLV, is really going to be a solution to the problem.
It'll be very interesting to see if this jump starts the Trojans offense moving forward. A little bit time to get it settled, and then a big home stretch. Well, coming up on the other side, we hit our home stretch with our players to watch week ahead in the week in the Big Ten. Next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, we like to leave you with players to watch every week. So for week 11, Danny, who's your player to watch?
I love to see how guys bounce back. I'm keeping my eyes on Drew Aller, Penn State's quarterback. Rough loss, wasn't all on him, but he's still banged up. How much does that knee bother him against a little pesky team in Washington? If it struggles early, as the crowd get a little restless, I'm curious to see if he steps up and responds with a big performance against Washington.
I'm going to go Max Brosmer of Minnesota. Guy's been playing extremely well and not putting the ball in harm's way, complimenting what they want to do there with the Gophers and that run game, getting the ball to the playmakers. Brosmer for me. See if he can get it done this weekend at Rutgers.
My player to watch this week, we mentioned him earlier in the show. It's Indiana defensive lineman Mikhail Kamara. He's got 14.5 tackles for loss, and he's got 9.5 sacks to lead the Big Ten. It's going to be a big test for him against Michigan. But instead of just a player to watch, I'd also like to mention the people who are watching. Shout out to everybody at the Swigwam Beach Bar in St. Pete Beach down in Florida. I'm thrilled to hear you guys have opened up. I know you guys are watching us every single week, and I'm hoping that everybody in St. Pete, Treasure Island, and the entire Tampa area is doing better following the Hurricanes Helene and Milton.
Love that. Shout out to y'all. And shout out to Ethan Kaliakmanis, because what an opportunity you have in a revenge game against Minnesota. And it's not just an Ethan Kaliakmanis revenge game against Minnesota. It's also a Kirk Shiraka revenge game against Minnesota. We've got lots of back and forth. Now, PJ Fleck throwing some strays out there, just like, oh yeah, he's just doing some RPO stuff. You know, they're doing a good job of making plays after the catch. Oh, Rutgers needs a win bad for the battle for bowl eligibility, and now the Greek Rifle gets to take aim at his old team. I think that Ethan Kaliakmanis is going to either make or break Rutgers bowl hopes with his performance against his old team, the Minnesota Golden Gophers, coming up this weekend. Well, we've got an absolutely bananas week here on the Cover 3 podcast. So on Tuesday night, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Come and join us live at youtube.com/cover3 as we'll be reacting to the new college football playoff selection committee rankings. Then we're back live again on Wednesday with more big game breakdowns, 11 a.m. Then we're back on Thursday, 11 a.m. with our locks for week 11. And of course, as you always know, 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturdays for our instant reactions. Scan that QR code and download the Cover 3 podcast wherever you get the most excellent podcasts around.